The winter wind cut through the military camp like a frozen blade, carrying the smell of diesel smoke and distant gunfire. It was a forward operating base in A that no one spoke about on the evening news anymore, a place where names appeared on casualty lists and then faded into silence. Among the rows of metal shipping containers converted into offices and sleeping quarters, one particular door bore no nameplate. It only had a small, hand-painted number, 7. Inside, a woman sat alone at a steel desk, the light from a single bulb casting sharp shadows across her face. She wore the uniform of a field medic, but the insignia on her collar had long been scratched dull by sand and sweat. Her hands, resting on a worn leather journal, were steady. They had always been steady, even when everything around her was not. Her name was Captain Sarah Mbeki, and for the last 11 years, she had been the ghost of every battlefield she had stepped onto. To the soldiers she served with, she was simply Doc. They knew her as the one who ran toward the screaming, who knelt in mud and blood with nothing but bandages and morphine and a will made of iron. They knew she had pulled more men from the jaws of death than anyone could count. But what they did not know, what she had never spoken aloud, was the other number she carried. The number that lived not in her journal, but in her bones. The mission that would change everything began like any other. A patrol was needed to secure a village on the edge of rebel-held territory. Intelligence was thin, the kind of maybe safe, maybe not that had become the standard after years of asymmetrical warfare. The squad was made up of young men, most barely out of their teens, led by a lieutenant who had never seen real combat. He was a good man, eager and nervous, the kind who studied manuals and believed in rules. Sarah had seen 100 like him. Some learned fast. Some did not learn at all. As the armored vehicles rumbled through the dusty streets, Sarah sat in the back, her medical kit between her boots. She watched the faces of the soldiers around her. Private First Class Miller was bouncing his knee, a habit she knew meant fear. Sergeant Diaz was checking his rifle for the 4th time. Corporal Reeves, the youngest at 19, was trying to joke about the heat. Sarah did not laugh. She had learned long ago that laughter before a mission was often the last sound you heard from a person. Instead, she reached out and touched Miller's knee. He stopped bouncing. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The ambush came not from the front, but from the flanks. Two RPGs streaked from the upper windows of a half-collapsed schoolhouse. The first struck the lead vehicle, turning it into a ball of fire and twisted metal. The second hit the rear, boxing the middle vehicle, their vehicle, into a kill zone. The sound was not like the movies. It was a physical blow, a pressure that crushed the air from Sarah's lungs and left her ears ringing with a high, piercing whine. Then came the gunfire. Hundreds of rounds per minute, tearing through the thin armor of the transport. Men were shouting, crying, praying. Sarah did not freeze. She never froze. Her body moved before her mind could form a single thought. The rear hatch was jammed. She kicked it twice, then 3 times, until it groaned open. Smoke and dust filled her mouth. She dropped to the ground, crawling under the vehicle because standing meant death. Bullets snapped past her head like angry hornets. She could see the lead vehicle burning. She could hear the screams of the driver trapped inside. But her job was not the driver. Her job was the living. She pulled Miller first. He was hit in the leg, the femoral artery severed. Blood pumped in a rhythm that matched his terrified heart. Sarah clamped the wound with her fingers, feeling the hot spray coat her gloves. She dragged him to the shallow ditch on the side of the road, the same ditch where villagers threw their garbage. It did not matter. In that ditch, he had a chance. She tore open a combat gauze, packed the wound, wrapped it tight. Miller was crying, saying he did not want to die. Sarah looked into his eyes and said, "You are not dying today. Not on my watch." Her voice was calm. It was always calm. Then she went back. Diaz was dragging Reeves, who had taken shrapnel in the chest. The boy's face was gray, his lips blue. Sarah took over, laying Reeves flat, cutting open his shirt. The shrapnel had punctured a lung. She grabbed a chest seal, slapped it on, listened for the hiss of air escaping. It did not stop. She put a second seal, then a third. The hiss stopped. Reeves took a rattling breath. "Good," she said. "Stay with me." The firefight lasted 22 minutes. By the time reinforcements arrived, Sarah had treated 6 men, stabilized who should have bled out, and held the hand of a 7th, the lieutenant, who had taken a round through the neck. There was nothing she could do for him. He died looking at her, his mouth open as if he wanted to say something. Sarah closed his eyes and whispered a prayer she had learned from her grandmother in a language no one else in the squad understood. That night, back at the base, she sat in her shipping container and wrote in her journal. She did not write about the lieutenant. She wrote the date, the location, and a single number, 144, that was the count of enemy combatants she had personally killed in 11 years. Not as a sniper, not as a front-line rifleman, as a medic. The rules of engagement were clear. Medics were non-combatants. They wore the Red Cross. They were not supposed to take lives. But Sarah had learned, in her very first deployment, that the Red Cross meant nothing to a man who wanted to kill your patients. If she let an enemy fighter walk past her to shoot a wounded soldier, that soldier died. If she picked up the fallen rifle of a dead comrade and fired back, she saved lives. It was simple math. Terrible, bloody math. The first time she killed, she had been 22 years old. A man with a machete had broken through a perimeter and was running toward a tent full of wounded. Sarah had a pistol. She fired 3 times, he fell. She vomited behind the tent. Then she went back to work. By the 3rd kill, the vomiting stopped. By the 10th, she stopped counting days. By the 50th, she stopped dreaming at all. Sleep became a black void where nothing happened, and she preferred it that way. The number 144 was not a trophy. It was a scar. And like all scars, it was permanent. The base commander at the time, a colonel who had never seen combat, once asked her in a review board why her medical records showed no signs of PTSD. She looked at him and said, "Sir, I don't have time for PTSD. My patients need me." He laughed nervously. She did not laugh. She was not joking. The war had carved something out of her and replaced it with something else. Call it focus. Call it numbness. Call it whatever you wanted. It kept her alive. It kept her soldiers alive. That was all that mattered. Years passed. Deployments came and went. She was promoted, then demoted for insubordination. She had punched a supply officer who had been hoarding antibiotics, then promoted again because no one else could do her job. Her reputation became legend, whispered in mess halls and barracks from one war zone to another. "Doc Becky," they said, "that woman has ice in her veins." They meant it as a compliment. She took it as a curse. Ice does not feel. Ice does not mourn. Ice does not break. But even ice can crack under enough pressure. The crack came not from the enemy, but from her own side. A new general had been assigned to oversee the entire theater of operations. General Marcus Thorne was a West Point graduate, a man of pristine uniforms and sharper edges. He had spent most of his career behind desks, pushing battalions around on maps like chess pieces. He believed in order, in protocol, in the clear line between right and wrong. He had never held a dying soldier in his arms. He had never smelled a wound go septic. He had never had to choose who lived and who died in the space of a single heartbeat. General Thorne arrived at the base on a Tuesday, accompanied by a swarm of aides and journalists looking for a positive story. The war was going badly, and the Pentagon wanted a hero. They wanted a clean, photogenic story of bravery and compassion. They did not want the truth. They never wanted the truth. The general walked through the camp, inspecting troops, shaking hands, posing for photos. He spoke in the clipped, confident tones of a man who had never been wrong about anything important. Then he came to Sarah's medical station. She was in the middle of changing the dressings on Miller's leg, the same Miller she had pulled from the ambush 2 months earlier. The wound was healing, but slowly. Sarah was humming a soft tune, an old lullaby her mother used to sing. Miller was half asleep, comforted by her presence. General Thorne stopped at the entrance of the tent. He looked at Sarah's uniform. He looked at her scratched insignia. He looked at the rifle slung across her back, a rifle that, by regulation, a medic was not supposed to carry. His face hardened. "Soldier," he said, his voice loud enough to make Miller flinch. "Why are you armed?" Sarah did not look up. She continued wrapping the bandage. "Because the enemy has guns, sir," she said. "And they don't respect the Red Cross." The general stepped into the tent. His aides followed, cameras clicking. He was not used to being answered with anything less than immediate, trembling obedience. "I asked you a question, Captain. Medics are non-combatants. The Geneva Convention is clear. You are not to engage hostile forces. Remove that weapon immediately." Now Sarah looked up. Her eyes were dark, flat, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and forgotten too little. Sir, with respect, the Geneva Convention doesn't matter when you're the only thing standing between a wounded man and a bullet. This rifle has saved more lives than my medical kit. A murmur went through the gathered journalists. This was not the script. The general's face reddened. He was not used to being challenged, especially not in front of cameras. You are a medic, Captain. Your job is to heal, not to kill. The regulations are absolute. Remove that badge, the Combat Me Dick badge, if you intend to act like a common soldier. Remove it now. The tent went silent. Even Miller stopped breathing. Sarah slowly finished wrapping the bandage, patted Miller's leg, and stood up. She was not tall, but in that moment, she seemed to fill the entire tent. She looked at General Thorne, and for the first time, she allowed something to show in her eyes. Not anger, not defiance, something worse. Something tired and ancient and unbearably sad. Sir, she said quietly, do you know what my kill count is? The general blinked. I don't care about your A-144, Sarah interrupted. That's how many enemy fighters I have killed. Not because I wanted to. Because every single one of them was about to kill one of my patients. Every single one. She stepped closer to him. He stepped back. You want me to remove my badge? You want me to stop carrying a weapon? Fine, but you come with me on the next patrol. You sit in that ditch while the bullets fly. You hold a 19-year-old's lungs inside his chest while someone shoots at your head. And then you tell me what a medic is supposed to do. The general's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The cameras kept clicking. The journalists were scribbling furiously. For the first time in his career, General Marcus Thorne had nothing to say. He realized, in that frozen moment, that he was standing in front of a woman who had done more in 1 hour of combat than he had done in his entire life. He realized that her kill count was not a stain on her honor. It was a testament to the horrors she had endured to protect the innocent. And he realized, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, that he was the one who should be ashamed. He turned and walked out of the tent without another word. His aides scrambled after him. The journalists lingered, but Sarah waved them away. She sat back down next to Miller, who was staring at her with wide eyes. Doc, he whispered. Is that true? 144. Sarah picked up her roll of bandages. She began to hum the lullaby again. Don't worry about that, Miller, she said. Just focus on getting better. But Miller did not stop staring. And neither, it turned out, did anyone else. The story leaked to the press within hours. By the next morning, Captain Sarambeki was the most famous and most controversial medic in the world. Some called her a hero. Some called her a monster. But no one, least of all General Thorne, ever asked her to remove her badge again. The days that followed the confrontation in the medical tent were unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. For 11 years, she had operated in the shadows, a quiet guardian whose name appeared on no medals and whose face was known only to the soldiers she saved. Now, her face was on every news channel, every social media feed, every newspaper from Washington to London to Cape Town. The headline varied. But the question was always the same. Is a medic who kills still a medic? The military launched a formal review of her conduct. Generals who had never heard of her a week ago now spoke her name with a mixture of awe and anxiety. The Pentagon was divided. Some wanted to court-martial her for violating the Geneva Convention. Others wanted to give her the Medal of Honor. Sarah wanted neither. She wanted to be left alone with her patients and her journal and the quiet hum of the generator outside her shipping container. But the world does not leave alone those who have seen the darkest parts of it. Letters began pouring into the base. Thousands of them. Most were from soldiers, past and present, thanking her for saying what they had always felt. Every medic I know has done the same. One letter read, "We just never said it out loud." Others were from civilians, many of them angry. "You are a disgrace to the white coat," one woman wrote. "Nurses save lives. They don't end them." Sarah read every letter, sorted them into 2 piles, and then burned both piles in a metal barrel behind the mess hall. She did not need reminders of what people thought. She needed to prepare for the next mission. The next mission came faster than anyone expected. 3 weeks after the incident with General Thorne, intelligence reported that a rebel commander, known as the Jackal, was moving a large force toward a village called Martin. The village was home to 300 civilians, mostly women and children. The jackal was not known for mercy. He had a habit of executing entire families to send a message. The military's response was to send a company of infantry to intercept him before he reached the village. Sarah's unit was attached as medical support. Despite the controversy, despite the pending review, she strapped on her medical kit, slung her rifle across her back, and climbed into the same armored vehicle that had been ambushed months earlier. Miller, now walking with a slight limp, sat across from her. He was going back to war. Sarah had tried to stop him. He had refused. "If you can go back, Doc," he said, "so can I." The operation was supposed to be simple. The company would move into the hills overlooking Martin, establish a defensive position, and wait for the jackal's forces to enter the kill zone. But wars are not simple. Wars are chaos wearing a uniform. The jackal, it turned out, had anticipated the ambush. Instead of walking into the trap, he split his force into 3 columns. One column pinned down the main company. The second column flanked left. The third column, the largest, went straight for Martin. The civilians were going to be slaughtered unless someone stopped them. The decision fell to Sarah's squad, the same squad that had survived the ambush months ago. They were positioned on a ridge overlooking the road to Martin. They had a clear line of sight to the third column, about 60 fighters, armed with machine guns and rocket launchers, moving fast toward the village. The squad leader, now a hardened Sergeant Diaz, looked at his men. There were 12 of them. 12 against 60. He called headquarters and requested reinforcements. The answer was a 4-minute delay. In 4 minutes, the jackal's men would be inside Martin. In 4 minutes, 300 civilians would be dead. Diaz looked at Sarah. "Doc," he said, "we can't hold them. But we can slow them down. Give the village time to evacuate. What do you think?" Sarah did not hesitate. "We do it," she said. "I'll set up a casualty collection point behind that boulder. You keep them off me. I'll keep your men alive." What happened next would be studied in military academies for years, not because it was brilliant, but because it was impossible. 12 soldiers, 1 medic, against 60 battle-hardened fighters. The first wave came screaming down the road, firing wildly. Diaz's men returned fire, picking off the front runners. Sarah crawled from body to body, dragging the wounded behind the boulder. Within 5 minutes, 3 of her soldiers were down. 1 had a shattered arm. 1 had a gut wound. The third, a young private named Chen, had taken a round through the shoulder. Sarah worked on all 3 at once, packing wounds, injecting morphine, shouting instructions to the men still fighting. "Diaz, shift left. Miller, suppress that machine gun. Reeves, get on the radio and tell them we need air support yesterday." The second wave came harder. The jackal's men realized they were being stalled by a handful of soldiers, and they grew angry. They charged in a mass, screaming, firing from the hip. Diaz's squad killed 8 of them, then 10, then 15. But the numbers were overwhelming. 2 more soldiers went down. Sarah ran into the open to pull one of them back. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. She grabbed the soldier's vest and dragged him, her legs burning, her lungs screaming. Behind the boulder, she cut off his uniform and found a wound in his thigh. The bullet had nicked the artery. Blood was pumping in a bright red jet. She shoved her finger into the wound, feeling the slippery heat of the torn vessel, and clamped down. "You're not dying," she said, though she was not sure if she was talking to him or to herself. The third wave never came. Because just as the rebels were massing for a final charge, the air support arrived. 2 Apache helicopters swooped over the ridge, their chain guns roaring. The rebels scattered, but it was too late. The Apaches turned the road into a killing field. Within 90 seconds, the third column ceased to exist. The survivors fled into the hills, dragging their dead and wounded with them. The village of Martin was saved. When the reinforcements finally arrived, they found a scene that defied belief. 12 soldiers, 1 medic, had held off 60 fighters for 18 minutes. 8 of the 12 soldiers were wounded. All 8 were alive. Not a single one had died on that ridge. Sarah Mbeki had done what she had always done. She had turned impossible odds into a miracle. But the cost was written on her face. She was covered in blood, her soldier's blood, her own blood from a gash on her forehead she did not remember getting. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in 11 years, Sarah's hands were shaking. That night, She sat in her shipping container. The journal was open in front of her. She picked up her pen and wrote the date, the location,